annoying combat system in the world. Doing terrible, tedious tasks. And so much cringe. Then this game's for you.
Hey everybody, my name's Nick, and I just got finished playing Final Fantasy X FFX, and I grew up on this game. This is my favorite game from my childhood. I love this game, and I used to play it all the time. But as a young child, I realized I never actually beat this game. The later stages of the game for my 6 to 10-year-old self were just too hard. So when I saw this on the PlayStation Store as a remastered edition, you know, just better graphics, better audio, I just had to play it because I had so many good memories of it. And I wanted to see whether it would withhold the test of time and whether it stood up to my memories of it. And my goodness, this game is rough. I just want to start off by saying I still love this game, but as it stands up to games nowadays, it just doesn't compare. And I want to go into why that is, because there are a lot of things that I really enjoyed, but there are a lot of things in this game that were almost good, but because they weren't done correctly, they turned into dislikes due to tediousness. Really, that's the most egregious thing that this one does, is that everything in this game is so tedious. Now, I think the first and the biggest thing that just kills this game's ability to be great is there's so much potential for this game's replay ability. It's like, man, there's all these celestial weapons I want to go get. There's a bunch of mini games I didn't really beat because they were too tedious and I didn't want to do all that. And I cannot replay the game because of the crazy amount of cutscenes. Not just cutscenes, unskippable cutscenes. The fact that in the remastered edition they didn't just give us the ability to skip cutscenes, man, it would have been, I wish they would have, because it needs it. Up until you get the airship to travel wherever you want, this game is like totally unenjoyable on a replay. Probably 30 to 50% of my gameplay is me on my phone watching YouTube, playing Hearthstone, whatever, while I'm waiting for cutscenes to go by, because they are taking forever and you cannot skip them. Sometimes you'll get lucky and you can just mash the X button. You know, I play on PlayStation, of course, but I just sit there and mash the X button, and sometimes you get to go through dialogue a little bit faster, but it's still not significant. It's still not all the time. You don't know when you can actually do that for sure, so you're just kind of mashing X for no reason, and it doesn't help much. And I think that is the biggest negative about this game, because as I said, there is so much content and so much replayability, but I don't want to do it because I can't skip anything, and I sure as heck don't want to listen to this story a second time. But that'll lead us into something that I did like, which is the story. While I don't want to listen to it for a second time or a third time or whatever, how many times I want to replay this to try to get everything, the story I thought was fantastic. Just going through this journey where you have Titus, and he is from Xanarkin that is 1,000 years gone. You don't know why he's here. You don't know how he got here. You don't know what's going on. And you can always see like this little bit of tension between him and the party, because he's always just kind of trying to hype up Yuna and trying to get her to defeat Sin, and he doesn't realize, oh, she defeats Sin, she dies. Then at the end, we get this little kind of a twist, and turns out that Titus is actually, he's basically an Aeon, right? Being summoned by these faiths. He's an Aeon. Jecht, who is the new Sin, is also one. And man, it's just the part that I love the most is that they actually kill Titus at the end. Because I could have foreseen a world where they did this happy ending and they let a faith just keep summoning out Titus until it's time for him to go, or for whatever reason. But the fact that he does die at the end, and that even though you do defeat Sin, you defeat Yu Yevon, so you defeat Sin forever, and Titus disappears, I just loved that. Now, there were a bunch of cringe moments, the infamous laughing scene, but overall, I thought the story was great, and I really enjoyed it. The fact that you have these spheres lying around Spira that you can go find to get a little more background of Jekt and Serbraska, it just makes it great. It's so fun. But man, I wish after that first playthrough, I could just go back and skip everything. I can skip all the cutscenes because I want to start over and go get all this stuff, and I can't because of that. Now, another thing that I really loved about this game were the boss fights. The boss fights were always unique, and they really required you to learn the fights. You had to know how to counter specific abilities from the boss. For instance, if you have one boss, let's just say Lady Unalesca, she puts zombie on everyone, but if you heal that zombie off of them and she does a mega death, then everybody dies because you have to leave zombie on at least one of them, but then you can't heal them. So it's like there's these little minute things that just make the boss fights so much fun. One thing I hate, while the boss fights are great, the fact that they couldn't figure out a different antagonist than Seymour. We fought Seymour not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times. By the 4th time, I'm like, how the hell is this guy still even here? There's no way he should be a part of this game anymore. We should have fought him twice, and then there should have been a different antagonist introduced somehow. I don't care how they did it, but the fact Seymour is the main antagonist, aside from Sin, obviously, but the fact that Seymour is the main antagonist for so long after being killed 4 times is just dumb. I hated that. His boss fights were cool. I will give it that, and I think they could have just applied that to different antagonists. And I love how even if you're under-leveled, if you understand the mechanics of the boss fight, you can beat the bosses. The next thing that I loved about this game is the combat. Not necessarily how the combat is initiated, which is one of the worst things in the entire world, but the combat itself. This is a biased take for me because I have that old man life. I'm married, I have kids. I have a very hard time sitting down for a gaming sesh and just being able to sit down for an hour, 2 hours, whatever, however long I'm gonna game for without being bothered. I can't get an hour straight. So the fact that I can just kind of I'm in the middle of the combat, but I can just put the controller down, get up, go help out with whatever I need to help out with, and then come right back to it, and I'm not dead because of it. I really enjoyed that. But the combat also does allow for a fun addition to strategy in the game, right? This is why the boss fights are so much more fun, because you can take your time, you can strategize. You have 3 character slots on the battlefield at all times, and they each have different abilities. You have tank type, you have buffing types, you have a healer, you have a black magician, and that is just really fun. And I enjoy the strategic aspect of this game. Now, this next like that I have is more of the idea of it rather than the execution of it. I really like all of these side events, quests, the hidden objects that you can find and get and that are only hinted at. Now, I'll tell you what, I sure as heck didn't do it like the old-fashioned way where I just figure it out on my own. Heck no, I have YouTube now, so I YouTubed how to get all the celestial weapons that I got, all of the hidden Aeons, right? There's 3 extra Aeons that you can get, and I just YouTubed how to do that. By the end of the game, I had Auron's celestial weapon, I had Kimari's, I had Yuna's, and I had Riku's. And the reason I had those 4 and I didn't get all of them is because of the tediousness of the other ones. I could not do it. And man, once you get the celestial weapons, your damage is insane, and I love it. First phase of the Sin fight, I literally two-shotted this dude. It was hilarious. Now, I actually did play this game a while back, and you can get stuck at the Sin fight. If you just get Titus's flee ability because you're annoyed with the combat style and you just flee from everything, you can get to the end boss and not be able to beat him, because that's how I did it the first time, and I had to restart because I was just so upset with how the combat was initiated. So I just kept fleeing everything and I ended up being underleveled. So the second time through, I got all of the Aeons. I got the most important celestial weapons, right? Because I basically only used Kimari and Auron and then Titus as my buffer. And it was easy. And I enjoy it being easy sometimes. It is fun. Now, the last thing that I really liked about this game, and I'm sure would be everyone's like number one or number two thing, is the soundtrack. This music is absolutely amazing. It is beautiful and it's great. Sometimes I'll be sitting in my office and just go to YouTube and put on the Final Fantasy X soundtrack and just listen to a few of my favorite tracks that they have on this game, because man, it's fantastic and I love listening to it and I could never get enough of it. Now, to move on to some things that were almost good. Some things that if they would have changed, there's actually only a couple of them, right? 2 or 3 that I could think of. Some things that if they changed them just a little bit of tweaking could have made these things great and could have put them up in that likes category and could have made this game even better. First and foremost is the sphere grid system. This could have been a great system if they just streamlined it a little bit better. The system is way too convoluted, confusing, and random. I feel like when I'm building Auron, if I'm going through this tank / heavy like two-handed fighter, which obviously he is, if I'm going through this branch of the tree, why am I getting random magic buffs? Why is there even any ability to get increase to my magic? Because I tell you what, I'm sure as heck not making Auron or Kimari or Titus into a healer or a mage. So just streamlining it, just making it a little less confusing and a little less random, I think would have made this one so much better. Because man, I have to sit in that system for like 15 minutes to look 20 steps ahead to understand where I'm going, what abilities I need next, and what's the most efficient and the most, in Auron's case, the most strength that I can get on my way to these abilities that I need. But the sphere grid overall, I thought, was decent. Now, the next thing that was just almost good were the celestial weapons and the hidden Aeons. What I hate the most, right? Let's talk about the hidden Aeons. There are 3 of them, one of them being Anima. And man, he is such an insane Aeon to get. But he requires that while you're at every single temple, you do the destruction spheres. You have to do the destruction spheres on every single one of Yuna's temples. So if you do not know that, or if you miss one by accident, just not thinking about it, once you get excommunicated from the Yevon church, you can't go back, basically, right? Because you have the dark Aeons that you have to fight if you go back, and they are impossible to kill unless you are like maxed out and you have like auto res on your gear, and it's basically impossible, right? You can do it, but it would take so long and it is very difficult to do. So it really sucks that you can't go back to be able to get that. I say that because on my first playthrough, whenever I was too weak, I got every single destruction sphere except the very first one. I just forgot. I thought I got it, but turns out I did not, and I couldn't get Anima. So that put a bad taste in my mouth for it, and it ruined my first run. Not only that, but the fact that I couldn't defeat Sin either because I had just not grinded enough. So that really sucks. You know, I played that first playthrough like a year ago, and then because of that first like 30 hours where I have to sit through 20 of those hours being cutscenes, I couldn't do it, and I came back to it like a year later, and now here I am, and I finally beat it, and I was able to get all of most of the content that I wanted to do. Now, those are the two things that I thought were almost good. Now, for the absolute dislikes of the game. First and foremost, and I'm sure this has to be everybody's number one, the constant repetitive fighting with extremely boring enemies. You cannot, unless you get special armor, which I'll talk about in a moment, you cannot go more than 5 steps without being stopped. And my god, that gets so old very fast. And the only way to avoid it is to get a no combat piece of armor. But unless you look it up, which nowadays is very common, right? That is easy. And even then, getting it takes like a good hour or two. So unless you know that, the combat is just terrible, to exclude the boss fights. I'm talking about just walking on the street and you're trying to go grab a chest and you have to fight 20 different combat sessions 2 to 5 steps apart. It's terrible. And you have to do it or else you will not be able to beat the later bosses, or you'll get stuck at Sin and not be able to beat him. With getting stuck on a boss, another thing that I absolutely hated is that if there is a cutscene going into a boss, which let's say 99% of the time there is, if there is a cutscene going into that boss and you die, because the cutscenes are unskippable, you cannot skip the cutscene. So every single time you die, if you're really struggling on the boss or you're under leveled and you really want to beat this boss still because you think, ooh, I understand how this mechanic works, I know I can get past that, you have to sit through a 60-second to a 5-minute cutscene every single time you want to do that boss fight. It's terrible. Being able to skip the cutscenes after a first replay or something, or after a first playthrough, or for boss fights after you've seen it once, would have made this game 1,000 times better. The next dislike is the mini games. The mini games are terrible. I will say I give them a little bit of a pass because Final Fantasy X specifically, but Final Fantasy in general, really popularized mini games in games. This is like the first time that it really happened, where you have the chocobo races, you have Blitz Ball, the butterfly gathering, and I gotta tell you, if there is a mini game, it's going to be awful. I can't imagine a single person that actually enjoys playing Blitzball. There's nobody ever. If you say you do, you're a liar. I don't believe you. But before Final Fantasy and before this game, mini games were not popular and they were kind of not even a thing. So I give it a slight pass because this really popularized it in games nowadays where you actually have fun mini games, but in this one they all sucked. They're all tedious. I don't like them. Now, my last big dislike is the Thunder Plains. This is the absolute worst zone I have ever played in. Coupled on top of the terrible fight initiation system, I now also have to dodge lightning, which for me, I don't know, maybe my reaction time is terrible, is nearly impossible. And even if you do dodge it, it doesn't save you that much time. So if you get knocked down, you go backwards and it takes you like 2 seconds to get up. If you dodge it, you jump backwards. So you're still going backwards, and instead of getting up for 2 seconds, maybe it takes 1 second to jump. It's still terrible. I don't know who thought of this tedious crap. I hope something bad happens to them, like they get the flu and they have the double dragon. Just out of sheer principle, they deserve it at least once on my behalf for having to go through this. And you know, you have to go back there for like 2 or 3 different celestial weapons. I hate that zone, and you have to do it multiple times. So those are my likes, dislikes, and what was almost good. Overall, this game still has a special place in my heart from my childhood. And honestly, even though it was so tedious, once I got to that end game and I was around collecting the celestial weapons, getting my Aeons, and I didn't have to deal with all these cutscenes, I actually had fun with it. And I had the no combat thing, so I can just run around and choose when to do combat. It made it a lot better, and for the nostalgia factor, I loved it. But overall, this game is really, really bad. If you are a big fan of the Final Fantasy franchise and you've never played this one, I'd say it's worth a playthrough just to see where the game came from on your first playthrough. It is a fun game whenever you're not hating the cutscenes and you're just going along with it and you're watching them for the story, and it is fun. It is great. Or it's also worth a playthrough if you played this as a child or a young man or woman or non-binary, and you want that nostalgia factor. You'll get it. I still love this game. So if this isn't something that you want the nostalgia for, or to be able to see where your beloved Final Fantasy franchise came from, don't play this game. You don't need to. So that's about all I have for you on this one. Everyone, thanks for watching. Hey, Nick here. If you enjoyed this video, please gently caress that like button for us.
And Ray, thanks for watching. It was a blast. Make sure to hit that subscribe if you want to stay up to date with what we're doing, what me and him are doing. There. Me and him, Nick and Ray. Subscribe.